In this next episode of our Promised Land series, we arrive at the Temple Mount to discover how it became the holiest place in the Promised Land. At the heart of the Promised Land is the Temple Mount, the focal point of the Jewish Bible story, weaving together threads of sacrifice, obedience, and divine providence. This sacred site, revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, carries profound significance rooted in the ancient narratives of faith. From the heights of Mount Moriah to the splendor of the temple, God's handiwork unfolds with purpose and promise. But why is the Temple Mount so significant? What made it the most sacred place on earth to the Jewish people today? And what makes it significant to Christians who believe the Bible's narrative about it? Today, I invite you to travel back in time through more than 4,000 years of Jewish history to discover the story of the Temple Mount and to see its incredible significance and explore what makes it the holiest place in the Promised Land.
From the very first book of the Bible, the heavenly message is clear. God chose the Jewish people as His vehicle to help repair our world. He chose a people and He chose a land for this purpose, creating a nation that would shine heaven's light into our dark world and ultimately give the world the Messiah. At the center of the Promised Land was and is a chosen city, the city of Jerusalem. Why is Jerusalem so important in the Bible? It's because Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, was chosen by God as the precise location for His eternal home. It was chosen for the one true God's holy temple. That's why, as Isaac and I explored the entire Promised Land together, I thought we should learn more about the Temple Mount and the temple itself, something that is almost impossible to imagine today because it likely once stood where the Dome of the Rock now stands. So, Isaac took me to a location less known in Israel, where we could literally touch a temple contemporary to the first temple that Solomon built.
Well, Isaac, today we are talking about the Temple Mount in the Promised Land. We're in a place today that is somewhat fitting outside of Jerusalem that we can talk about the Temple Mount. So tell me exactly where we are right now.
So right now we are in a very important place called the Tel Arad, northeast part of the Negev. And the ruins that you see here, these are the ruins of a temple, date back in time to the 10th century BC, 3,000 years old, the temple, which means that the temple that you see here was built during the time of King Solomon.
This temple was built during the time of King Solomon. Was the first temple already in existence?
Yes.
Okay.
And remember, this is the same King Solomon who built the first temple in Jerusalem on top of Mount Moriah.
Just quickly, tell me why they would build this here when there was already a temple in Jerusalem.
This is a very good question. And let me tell you something. From archaeological point of view, when this temple was found, archaeologists were so happy because now we have a better understanding how the temple in Jerusalem was look like. Remember, the temple in Jerusalem was completely destroyed by the Romans. Later on, we were not allowed to build a new temple, and then came the Muslims. So we had no 100% understanding how it was look like. When we find this temple that was built during the time of the same king, which means that same architect, same engineer, same builders who designed and built temple in Jerusalem, designed and built this temple. So this was very good for the archaeologists. But from biblical point of view, it's tragedy. Why it is tragedy? Because there is only one house to the Lord. And the one and only house of God is his house in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
God wanted to dwell on Mount Moriah, Jerusalem, not here. Now, why they built this temple here? Compromise. Jerusalem is so far away. We need to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year during the time of the 3 high holidays. It's very difficult. We have to cross the desert. It is all uphill. It's very dry. So why to bother? Let's compromise. So let's build another temple here. So instead to go up to Jerusalem, this is okay if we come and worship God here. So from biblical, theological point of view, this is very bad.
And, you know, this is in one way kind of good for us because in Jerusalem we can't see the actual temple, although we can see the reconstruction at the model. Let's talk about the Temple Mount first of all. When was the first temple built? Around what time?
3,000 years ago, during the time of King Solomon.
Yes.
So the first temple was built on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem.
Yes.
First temple existed until 586-87 BC. Then Babylonian occupation, destruction of the first temple, end of the time of the first temple, no more temple, exile to Babylon.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Israel is facing one of its most difficult challenges, but with your help, First Century Foundations is making a difference on the ground by supporting local charities like the Joseph Project.
First Century Foundations has been thrilled to be able to help with humanitarian aid items for the warehouse here. But a few months into the war, all of your stocks were depleted. Talk to us about how important it was to get this place restocked.
There's a big request for food all the time. People are without a house, without work, and they need this supply, they need this help. So your donations are great help. It's helping the Joseph Project to keep purchasing these items and making sure it's going to the right people in the land of Israel.
And we just want to remind you at home that your donations matter.
Call today with your gift of $30 or more. 1-877-628-2800.
It was so incredible to stand in a Jewish temple that was built 3,000 years ago during the reign of King Solomon. It really helped me visualize the layout of the temple and imagine its incredible history.
Now, you mentioned about the first temple being destroyed. What comes after that?
Now, 50 years later, this country became to be under the rule of the Persians. Persian king in those days was Cyrus. He gave a very important declaration that allowed the Jews to return back to Jerusalem, and he allowed them to build a new temple. So Ezra and Nehemiah guided the Jews back to Jerusalem. When they returned back, Zerubbabel began to build a new second temple, and it took 20 years to build the second temple. Second temple was built on top, over the remains of the first temple, on top of Mount Moriah. They finished to build the second temple in 515 BC, and then this is the beginning of the time of the second temple.
Okay, now tell me about the building itself, how it's structured, where were people able to come, where were they not able to go, those kind of details.
So, the whole orientation was west, which means the main entrance was from the east. From the moment that people walked in, they faced west. First of all, when they came from outside, they entered into the big courtyard. Right in the middle was the altar. So this is where the people of Israel gathered, and this is where they could sacrifice. From the courtyard, further to the west, entrance to the temple, okay? And then, first of all, you go into the first room called the Holy. Only the priests were allowed to go into the Holy. Inside the Holy, three things. Number one, the menorah. Number two, altar of incense. Number three, the table with the 12 loaves of the shortbreads. Now, from there, further to the west, Holy of Holies. Between Holy to Holy of Holies was the curtain of the temple. In the Holy of Holies, during the time of the first temple, they still had the original Holy Ark of the Covenant with the original 10 Commandments inside. Only once a year, day of Yom Kippur, only the high priest, he was the one and only that was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. So to conclude, the courtyard with the altar in the middle for the people of Israel, then the building itself, the temple itself, holy for the priest, and Holy of Holies where only high priest could enter once a year.
Excellent. Now, we're standing in this structure, so illustrate for me where we are.
With pleasure. So, to help our viewers with the orientation, east, west,
Okay.
north, south. So in the east, you can see the entrance into the courtyard. So you see the courtyard. Over here, you can see the remains of the altar. Okay. Over here, you can see this wall. This is the separation between courtyard to the temple itself.
Okay.
Right behind this wall, the first room, this is the Holy. And the inner room, this is Holy of Holies.
Okay. Now, between the first temple and the second temple, what sort of differences were there, or were there any?
Many, many big differences.
Okay.
Because it says that those who saw the first temple, when they saw the second temple, they cried because they were so disappointed. First temple was much bigger, much wider, much higher, much more beautiful comparing to the second temple.
Okay.
Of course, that the first temple was splendor and beautiful decorations. Second temple, much less.
We've had the first temple, the second temple. Then Herod comes along, and he wants to sort of freshen things up a little bit. Tell us about that period of time.
So he decided to improve that place completely. What Herod did, he decided to build a huge plaza around the temple. Temple Mount at that time became to be the biggest sanctuary in the whole world.
Wow.
On that plaza, they had enough room for 500,000 people all at the same time. And on the southern side of the Temple Mount, he built the marketing area, the place where were the money changers and the people that used to sell white doves.
I think it's intriguing for people too to know that this exists out here in the desert and that they can come and see this. So we just encourage you, come to Israel. Let the Bible come alive for you. Come and see these things on your own. And who knows, maybe you'll even get a great guide like Isaac or Isaac himself.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for all the encouragement and for the compliments.
You're welcome.
Don't go away. When we come back, we see remains of the Jerusalem temple precincts and dive deeper into what the Bible has to say about the significance of the Temple Mount.
The nation of Israel is continuing to defend themselves against a rising tide of terror and anti-Semitism. However, Israel and the Jewish people are not alone. First Century Foundations has been actively supporting the people of Israel for nearly 40 years, providing food, clothing, and shelter for those in need, especially in these desperate times. When you give a gift of $30 or more, you are not only helping support the people of Israel, you are also showing that you care and are blessing God's chosen people in their hour of need. And when you give your gift, as a thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newsletter and Israel Prayer Watch. And for monthly donations, we will send you the book, Praying for the Peace of Jerusalem. Call now, 1-877-628-2800, or visit us online at firstcenturyfoundations.com and help the people of Israel during these dangerous times.
Because the Temple Mount of today looks nothing like it did when the Jewish temple stood in Jerusalem, it was so helpful that Isaac took me to Arad, where the remains of a Jewish temple dating to the time of King Solomon have been unearthed. The archaeology at Arad helps us visualize how the actual temple in Jerusalem was designed. But there is endless evidence pointing to the fact that the Jewish temple once stood atop Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, just as the Bible describes. The massive stones used by King Herod to expand Mount Moriah in the 1st century have now been exposed. One stone railing in particular that was discovered, which fell from the top of the temple precincts, contains a Hebrew inscription denoting the place where the trumpeter stood to announce the Sabbath. All around the Temple Mount, undeniable evidence of a Jewish temple has been unearthed, confirming the biblical narrative that it is the holiest location on earth.
At the heart of the Hebrew Bible's narrative lies the Temple Mount. And at the heart of the Temple Mount lies the pivotal account of Abraham and Isaac atop Mount Moriah, a story of unparalleled faith and obedience. Genesis 22 recounts how God tested Abraham's devotion by commanding him to sacrifice his beloved son, Isaac, on that very mountain. In a stunning display of faith, Abraham journeyed to Moriah, his heart undoubtedly heavy with the weight of this divine instruction. And here is how it plays out in the pages of Scripture. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. And he said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." It's an intriguing story. And one of the things that we wonder about is how old was Isaac when this occurred? Most Old Testament scholars, considering the clues from Scripture, place Isaac somewhere between the ages of 18 to 30. He was definitely not a young boy, as he was strong enough to carry the wood for the sacrifice. This also helps us understand that Abraham wasn't the only one whose faith was being tested. Isaac obviously respected his father implicitly and trusted him with his life. Why do I say that? Well, if Isaac was a vibrant young adult, it's logical to say that he could have resisted his father when being bound and put on the altar, but he didn't. And the story continues. And the 2 of them went on together. And when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on top of the altar, on top of the wood, and then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. And he went over and he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." You know, as Abraham raised the knife, poised to fulfill God's command, an angel intervened, staying his hand and providing a ram caught in a thicket as a substitute sacrifice. In that moment, Abraham's obedience and his trust in God were clarified and confirmed, and Mount Moriah became a sacred space, hallowed by the willingness of a father to surrender his most precious possession to the will of the Almighty. The connection between this profound act of faith and the Temple Mount is unmistakable. Tradition holds that Mount Moriah, where Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac, is synonymous with the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which King David purchased from Araunah in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 24 and 25, and where Solomon later built the magnificent temple. It's no accident that the instructions God later gave to Moses and the children of Israel regarding sacrificial worship incorporated the ancient practice of animal sacrifice. We first see the shedding of blood in Scripture when God himself killed an animal to make garments of skin for Adam and Eve before they were driven out of the garden. Later, Adam and Eve's son, Abel, made animal sacrifices to God. In the wilderness, animals were sacrificed only in the tabernacle and only by the priests according to God's instructions. The main purpose of the sacrifices was for the cleansing of sin, the sin of the priests and the sin of the people. It was a temporary covering for sin according to Hebrews chapter 10. These practices and rituals moved to the temple once it had been built by Solomon, and this became the permanent place for sacrifice and worship. The Temple Mount became the epicenter of Israel's worship and devotion, a place where sacrifices were offered, prayers ascended, and the presence of God dwelt among his people. It stood as a tangible reminder of Abraham's faithfulness and God's provision, a lighthouse of hope for generations to come. The lambs for sacrifice were raised and tended near Bethlehem, not far from Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount stood above the city of David. Each year, 4 days before Passover, on the 10th of the month of Nisan, the high priest would go to Bethlehem to get the perfect lambs that had been chosen for sacrifice, lambs without spot or blemish. And he would bring them to the temple to be inspected for 4 days. He would bring them through the eastern gate. Now think about this. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He entered the city on the 10th of Nisan through the eastern gate and was in Jerusalem 4 days before his crucifixion on Passover. And one of the things he did that week was to visit the temple and to cleanse it of its corruption. And 4 days later, when Jesus died on the cross, he became the once and for all sacrifice for the sin of all mankind. The sinless, spotless Lamb of God was crucified on Mount Moriah, just a 10-minute walk from where the temple stood. What Abraham was willing to do as an expression of faith and obedience in his God, God the Father did, sacrificing his only son as the ultimate expression of love and reconciliation for humanity. The essence of sacrifice permeates the biblical narrative, pointing to this ultimate sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. Just as Abraham withheld nothing from God atop Mount Moriah, so too did God withhold nothing in offering his only son for the redemption of humanity. The Temple Mount, with its history steeped in sacrifice, foreshadowed the ultimate sacrifice that would take place outside the city walls of Jerusalem. Reflecting on the significance of the Temple Mount and Mount Moriah, I circle back to God's words to Abraham that he would provide a sacrifice. It says that Abraham named the place, "The Lord will provide." And there is this little postscript, which informs us that to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." We are reminded of Jehovah Jireh, the Lord, our provider. Just as God provided a ram in the thicket for Abraham, so too does He provide for our needs, both temporal and eternal. The story of Abraham and Isaac serves as a timeless reminder that God is faithful to provide for His people, even in the most challenging circumstances. The Temple Mount stands as a testament to the enduring themes of sacrifice, obedience, and divine provision woven throughout the biblical narrative, from the heights of Mount Moriah to the splendor of the temple and ultimately to Golgotha. God's hand is evident, guiding His people and fulfilling His promises. As we gaze upon the sacred site of the Temple Mount, may we be inspired to emulate the faith of Abraham, trusting in the providence of Jehovah Jireh, our ever-present provider. And then one closing thought. In the future, the Temple Mount will play a significant role in the last days, according to Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, which declares, "In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob.'" This vision of the future inserts some intrigue, considering the temple no longer exists, and it underscores the central role that the Temple Mount will once again play in God's redemptive plan for all nations. But exactly how that will unfold, no one really knows, except the God of Israel, who chose this place and has promised that His work here is not done. Thank you so much for joining me today in the Promised Land as we continue to explore Israel's long and meaningful story here, a story that has touched and impacted so many of us around the world today. Please join me as we continue to discover the incredible and ongoing significance of the Promised Land.
I was a pastor for over 20 years before I first went to Israel, only to realize that I had been totally disconnected from the roots of my faith. Since then, I've been on a journey of discovery, and my faith has come alive in ways I never could have imagined. I'm Jeff Feuders, Director of First Century Foundations, and I am excited to invite you on my journey to the foundations of our faith, to discover your part in a Bible story that isn't over yet. First Century Foundations exists to reconnect Christians to the foundations of Christianity. And we do this by creating Bible-based media focused on Israel and the Jewish roots of our faith. But we don't just reconnect you to Israel's history, we help you participate in what God is doing in Israel today by connecting you to over 70 incredible ministries in Israel who desperately need our support. Will you partner with us? Together, we'll explore Israel's significant past while doing our part to ensure that Israel has a bright future.